My name is Suzanne and I want to share my story. 4 years ago, my husband Daniel and I moved into our first home together after getting married. It was a small, cozy house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, nothing too fancy, but it was perfect for starting our life together. We were also parents to two energetic children, Emma and Jack, both under the age of 5. One of the first major things we needed to take care of was upgrading the fence around our yard. The house only had an old, flimsy chain link fence, and we wanted something sturdier and taller to keep our kids safe while they played outside. After doing some research, we found a local contractor offering a beautiful cedar fence with stylish metal toppers on the posts. The price was surprisingly reasonable, especially for how elegant it would look. We were excited about having more privacy and knowing our kids could play safely in the yard without worrying about them wandering off or someone peeking in. Like any home improvement project, we had to go through some paperwork, land surveys, town permits, and so on. Once everything was approved, the workers were scheduled to start tearing down the old fence. I remember it being a particularly dreary, rainy day when the work began, but the crew pressed on through the weather. It was impressive how committed they were to the job, despite the cold drizzle coming down. That afternoon, as the crew dismantled the old fence, there was a loud knock on our front door. It wasn't a polite knock, it was aggressive and insistent. I opened the door to find a man standing there, arms crossed with a scowl on his face. He looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s with a weathered skin. His clothes were worn and he had the air of someone perpetually annoyed by the world. "Why are you tearing down the fence?" he barked before I could even say hello. "Excuse me," I replied, caught off guard by his tone. "I'm your neighbor from next door." "What are you doing with the fence?" His voice was sharp, accusatory. "We're replacing it," I explained, trying to keep my tone calm. "We've got young kids, and the old chain link fence doesn't feel safe enough to keep them protected while they play in the yard." His expression turned into a sneer. "Well, I don't like it. A big wooden fence will be ugly, and I don't want to have to look at it every day." I was surprised by his hostility. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but we've already gotten all the necessary approvals from the town." Without waiting for a response, I closed the door, trying not to let my frustration show. As I glanced out the window, I saw him lingering in our yard, glaring at the workers as they continued tearing down the old fence. He stayed there for a few minutes, muttering angrily under his breath before storming off. I hoped that would be the end of it, but deep down, I had a bad feeling it wouldn't be. For the next few days, things were quiet. Daniel and I were relieved, thinking maybe the grumpy neighbor had gotten over it. But then in the dead of night, our door rang. It startled us both awake, but we were too groggy to get up and investigate. We assumed it was just kids playing pranks or some kind of glitch. But the next night, it happened again. This time, Daniel jumped out of bed and hurried downstairs. I followed him, my heart racing. When we opened the door, no one was there. Just the dark, empty street. A chill ran down my spine. Someone was definitely messing with us. The following morning, we decided to install security cameras around the property. We figured if this continued, we'd at least have video evidence to see who was responsible. A few days later, while we were both at work, Daniel got a notification from the doorbell camera. He checked the footage and saw our neighbor, the same angry man from before, standing on our front porch, banging on the door and shouting. He was ranting about how the fence was a disgrace to the neighborhood and that he was going to make sure we paid for ruining the view. Daniel called me at work and I told him to just ignore it. I figured the guy was just blowing off steam, and once the fence was fully installed, he'd get over it. Or so I hoped. That night, as we were settling in after putting the kids to bed, Jack, our youngest, suddenly came downstairs crying. "Mummy, there's a man outside my window," he said between sobs. Daniel and I froze. "What do you mean, buddy?" I asked. Trying to stay calm, Jack pointed toward the backyard. "He was looking at me through the window," he said, his voice trembling. My stomach dropped. Daniel grabbed his phone and checked the camera feed. We could see someone lurking near the back fence. The same neighbor peering through the window into Jack's room. He was crouched low, trying to stay hidden while staring into our house. "Get the kids upstairs, now," Daniel whispered. I hurried to gather both Emma and Jack and brought them to our bedroom, locking the door behind us. Daniel stayed downstairs, watching the cameras. The man lingered near the fence for what felt like hours before finally sneaking back to his own yard. I was shaken to the core. This wasn't just about a fence anymore. This man was obsessed. We called the police the next morning. They came out to take a report. But since the neighbor hadn't technically done anything illegal at that moment, there wasn't much they could do except keep an eye on the situation. A few nights later, the doorbell rang again in the middle of the night. This time, when we checked the cameras, we saw the man standing on our porch with a hammer in his hand. He was hitting the side of the house, trying to break a window. I called the police, my hands trembling as I dialed. While we waited for them to arrive, we watched the footage, horrified. The man's face was twisted in anger and desperation as he muttered to himself, swinging the hammer over and over. When the police finally arrived, they caught him in the act, still standing on our porch. He didn't even try to run. Instead, he started shouting about how we had ruined the neighborhood, and how he was going to tear down the fence himself if he had to. The officers arrested him on the spot, but not before he gave us a look that sent chills down my spine. His eyes were wild, full of hatred. It was like staring into the eyes of someone who had completely lost touch with reality. We pressed charges, but the entire ordeal had shaken us so badly that we couldn't stay in that house any longer. Within a few months, we sold the house and moved to a new neighborhood, hoping to leave the nightmare behind. Our new home is peaceful and quiet, and the kids are much happier here. But every so often, late at night, I think about our old neighbor. I wonder what happened to him after we left. Did he stay in that house, watching the new family who moved in? Did he find a new target for his anger? I hope wherever he is now, he's not terrorizing anyone else. But part of me can't help but worry that one day, someone else will have to deal with the neighbor from hell, and they won't know the nightmare they're about to step into.